For this action item, we're going to hear from Josh Schwank, Senior Planner with DRCOG.
All right. Sorry about that, Mr. Chair. Still have an echo here. Em, can you check Zoom? Is everything all right? Is that any better? Oh. Try that. Oh.
While we're waiting, just to keep testing the microphones maybe, and also to let anyone know that we do have coffee and some refreshments out in the lobby. So, and anybody that's new, that's the way to get to our restrooms as well. Out these doors, and then take a right and you'll find the restrooms out there.
All right.
It doesn't sound like we have much of a echo anymore.
All right. There we go. So sorry about that. I believe we are up and running now. So let me pull up that memo. There's always something exciting to happen. So we do have 3 proposed amendments to our transportation improvement program for the committee's consideration this morning. The first of these is the addition of, okay, can we just unplug it? Okay. The addition of $8,560,000 in state legislative funding to CDOT's Vasquez Operational Improvements Project. Next, we have a scope change to Superior's McCaslin Boulevard Crossing project. The requested change would be to go from the design of a bike ped underpass to construction of at-grade crossing improvements. This project was selected through the Boulder County Subregional Forum, and the forum has approved this scope change. And finally, we have the addition of some state funding to the US 287 Safety Medium Project. This was a federal infra grant award. We are adding $4,102,000 in state safety funds, as well as $3,718,000 in state faster funds. So happy to answer any questions about any of these. Otherwise, I do have a proposed recommendation available for you in your packets. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Director Stewart.
Thank you. Not a question, but a comment. I want to thank the Regional Transportation Committee for looking at this and having it up in front of us. All 3 of those are important to CDOT, particularly the one on Region 4. We recently had quite a concern about some of the safety problems on 287, and we managed to get some funding for that. So the local governments in that area are really supportive of this, and I'd like to make a motion to approve this.
Thank you very much. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second, Deborah Johnson.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Seeing none, that motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're ready to move on to the next item on our agenda. This is the federal performance measures and targets. And is that the right one? Okay, excellent. And the presenter this morning is going to be Alvin Badal-Sanchez, who is a program manager with DRCOG. Good morning, Alvin.
Morning, Chair. Thank you. So I'll be going over two pieces of our federal performance measures that DRCOG is required to take an action on. So there are 5 different areas that DRCOG monitors, sets targets for, reports on. We'll be discussing 2 of those today. The first one we'll be discussing is PM1 safety performance. We set these targets annually. For each of these 5 different areas, there are different reporting requirements, different data used, different methodologies expected of MPOs, and we do report these to either the Federal Highway Administration or the Federal Transit Administration. So I'll start with just an overview of our Performance Measure 1 safety area. So this applies to all public roads in our Metropolitan Planning Organization region. The data we get from CDOT, they geolocate crashes on their system, and then we spend some time geolocating the crashes that are off system. And so a lot of the presentations you've been hearing from us on that Crash Data Consortium, on some of the deliverables we've put out, like our Crash Data Dashboard, this is that data source that we're pulling from. There are 5 performance measures that we're required to set targets for: number of fatalities, rate of fatalities, number of serious injuries, rate of serious injuries, and the number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. Calculation is a little unique. It is a 5-year rolling average, so I will run through what that looks like with the latest observed data and our forecast for the next 2 years. But just keep that in mind that we are not looking at 1 year for a target. It is a 5-year rolling average. As with all of our performance targets that come down from our federal partners, the guidance from them is that these should be realistic and achievable, not aspirational. And we, as an MPO, have the option to either support CDOT state targets or set our own for the region. And for the safety ones, we have historically set our own for the region. There's no financial penalty or funding restriction to DRCOG should we not meet these targets. But if we do not meet them, we can face additional scrutiny during our 4-year federal planning certification process. So we root our methodology in our Vision Zero plan, taking action on Regional Vision Zero that was adopted in 2020. Loss of life is not an acceptable price to pay for mobility, so we do try to balance that guidance from our federal partners. These targets should not be aspirational, but we do have an aspiration in this region for 0 fatalities and 0 serious injuries. So our targets are based on a horizon year of 2040 for 0 fatalities and 2045 for 0 serious injuries. And so, like I mentioned, we do try to balance that federal guidance. These do need to be realistic using best available data with our aspiration that we have established in MetroVision for Vision Zero. So I'll run through a couple of charts running for the number targets that we have. I'll start with people killed in crashes. Purple is the observed data that we've seen over the last 10 years or so. The teal, light blue diamonds on the far right are the forecast that we have. And so like I mentioned, these use 5 years worth of data. Our best available data at this point is 2023 crash data. When we adopted taking action on Regional Vision Zero in 2020, we calculated what it would take on average to reach 0 by 2040, and that was 13 fewer deaths in our region each year. And so the targets you'll see and the forecast you see take that 13 average forward. So like I mentioned, these are 5-year rolling averages. So these use the data from 21 through 25. 2021 through 2023, we do have actual data for. So those are the purple cells you see on your slide right now. So we do have that data available to us right now. And then we do forecast out with the previous adopted 0 target, the average yearly reduction of 13 deaths fewer every year. So 2024 and 2025 take that forecast into account. It is a 5-year rolling average, so that we take those 5 values and divide them by 5, and that gives us the target that we are looking to set for number of fatalities in the Denver region. For all of these, the desired trend is downward. So when we look at whether we've been achieving these targets, we will check to see whether we have had fewer fatalities than what the target was or the baseline was. And as I talk through this, I apologize for not acknowledging this sooner. You will hear me say targets and measures and metrics a lot. I do recognize that each of these data points is a family, a community, a person who's been impacted by a crash. So I do want to acknowledge that as you hear me maybe be a little stepped back from that conversation. The number of serious injuries follows that same methodology when we adopted taking action on Regional Vision Zero in 2020. At that time, the average yearly reduction required to achieve zero serious injuries by 2045 was 68 fewer serious injuries every year. And so we carried that average forward into our forecasts. Again, we have 21 through 23 data available to us, and then we apply that average yearly reduction to 2023 data to get forecasted data for 24 and 25. And then again, we take that 5-year average. The non-motorized deaths and serious injuries, again, same methodology. We'll note that this is non-motorized deaths and serious injuries. We do not break these two out for our federal targets, but we do have that data available to us if we did want to parse through that at a different level. The average yearly reduction at the time we adopted taking action on Regional Vision Zero was 15 fewer fatalities and serious injuries, and so we apply that to our 2023 most recent data point to get our 5-year rolling average target of 437. So on your screen right now are the 3 number targets that we set under this performance area, and then we do have 2 rate targets. We take into account the vehicle miles traveled in our region for fatalities and serious injuries. We've been setting these for, 7 years now? And so we were able to look back on with past crash data, how have we achieved those targets, either baseline data or that target data. And unfortunately, the last 2 years that we do have data available, we have not achieved any of these federal targets. Last point at 2021, we did have 3 that we achieved. So we'll be keeping an eye on this, especially as we anticipate receiving 2024 data later this summer and processing that, if this trend continues in terms of our federal performance measures. Since I mentioned that we have historically set our own targets for the region, I also want to touch on just a little bit of what we're doing here at staff at the agency to help achieve Vision Zero in the region. Last time we were here before y'all, we were looking to update our Taking Action on Regional Vision Zero plan. We wanted to explore a regional Safe Streets and Roads for All grant application. We were looking at establishing a crash data dashboard for the region and an update to our active transportation plan. So we have achieved 3 of those since we met last year, and our active transportation plan is currently in development. We also continue to host our Regional Vision Zero Working Group and are participating in Colorado's Safe Routes to Schools Advisory Committee. We are participating in a number of local corridor safety studies and are leading some corridor studies as well now. We are looking to hire a second senior safety planner to help bolster our Vision Zero program here at the agency. We're supporting some locals in their own SS4A funded safety action plans. We are still interested in this year looking at a regional SS4A application for the Denver region. And then each tip cycle, we do look at what projects are potentially supporting safety and calculate that. So our current tip currently looks at almost $430 million that could improve safety in our region. We are launching a permanent crash data consortium this year, and so first meeting will actually be later this month, looking to prioritize some of the actions that came out of that final report, and we continue to participate in Colorado's statewide traffic records advisory committee. That was for our safety targets. We set those every year. I'll shift us over to our bridge condition targets. This is one area under the PM2 infrastructure condition. This one is one we only handle once every 4 years, or in between that 4 years, if there's an action by CDOT that might revise any of those targets. So underneath infrastructure condition, there is pavement condition and bridge condition. We'll only be discussing bridge condition today. So CDOT's required to set 2- and 4-year targets. DRCOG's only required to set 4. It does include all bridges that carry the national highway system. It does include on and off ramps. And there are 2 measures that we set. There's the percent of NHS bridges by deck area classified in good condition and those classified in poor condition. Once we get into the data and you see the graphics that we've created, though, you will see that there is a 3rd category called fair. There are no targets for fair, but we only set for good and poor. calculation uses a rating for different areas of a bridge, either deck, superstructure, substructure, or culvert. And as with all of these federal targets, they should be realistic, achievable, and then we can set our own or support the state's targets, which is what we have historically done. So we're only looking at revising one of these targets. It's the percent of NHS bridges by deck area classified in good condition. And this is in response to CDOT. They have revised this target, and that's triggered a clock for us to either continue to support the state's targets or set our own for the region. Looking at the data available to us, the dark teal, dark blue is DRCOG condition for NHS bridges in our region. The lighter teal is the statewide data. The darker orange is the current target as it exists right now, as it is currently adopted, 36%. And the proposed target that we are bringing before this body that CDOT has adopted is 38.5%. So like I mentioned, the existing target is 36% or more of NHS bridges by deck area rated in good condition. The revised target is 38.5% that we're bringing before this body. There are some count data on that far right column. It is number of bridges, but I will, again, just note that it is by deck area. So if any one of those rating areas, superstructure, substructure, deck, fall into the poor category, then that bridge falls into the poor category. So it's not necessarily that any of these poor bridges are failing, or that all components of that bridge might be in poor condition. So then a map to show those bridges in our region that are on the National Highway System. Again, these are not all bridges in our region. These are only the ones that carry the National Highway System. The poor ones on the left in orange, and then the green and blue, the good and fair in our region. Like I mentioned, there is not a fair target for the region, but there are a significant number of bridges in our region that are fair. As you look at the bridge condition map on the left, you'll notice that there are already some projects in the pipeline for the state, I-270, the Central I-25 bridges, Spear 23rd, so there is already work being done by the state on these bridges. And so our proposal is to continue to support the state's targets as these are bridges on the National Highway System. We don't often put our own limited funding on those structures for our transportation, through our transportation improvement program, and these are primarily on the state system. Our recommendation is to continue to support the state's targets and adopt the revised target. So there is a recommended motion to recommend that the Board of Directors adopt the 25 safety targets and revised 4-year bridge condition targets for the Metropolitan Planning Organization area as part of federal performance-based planning and programming requirements. That concludes my presentation, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Alvin. Questions? Yes, Jacob.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to note for transparency, we did not have a unanimous vote at the Transportation Advisory Committee related to the safety measures. We did have one dissenting vote. The issue of the discussion around the vote and the one dissent, and Alvin, if you could go to our favorite slide in that portion of the presentation, relates to the trend line. As Alvin said, we calibrate these goals. These are federally required short-term safety targets. As he said, we do these annually, but we still relate them to our agency's larger goals for Vision Zero, for fatalities and serious injuries. And we have set that goal for 0 fatalities by 2040. We relate our progress on these short-term federally required measures to our longer-term goal of 0 fatalities by 2040. In order to do that, we made the decision about 3 years ago to set a trend line, which would be a reduction of 13 fatalities per year, starting around 2020, 2021 or so, to get to 2040. Now, crash data, as you can see, is variable. It goes up and down each year. It's pretty highly variable. And we made the decision to fix that trend line because it's an average of 13 fatalities per year. Some years might require more, some years might require less. So that trend line, that 13 fatality reduction per year to get to 2040 is not part of the federal requirements. It's a decision we've made to stabilize the data and be consistent in our methodology to help us get to 0 by 2040. There was some discussion around that at TAC, and again, one dissenting vote around shouldn't we be changing the trend line based on where we are in the data. TAC did approve these targets as presented and by implication did approve this methodology, but I did want to be transparent that we had that discussion and had one dissenting vote around that. Thank you.
Executive Director Rex.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jacob, for that clarification. I just wanted to mention Jacob mentioned when we talked about zero fatalities by 2040. That's the royal we. That was RTC and the board that made that determination. I just want to make that clear.
Thank you very much. Karen Stewart.
Thank you. I don't see any of our staff from CDOT here, but I'm assuming, Alvin, are you working with our staff as we look at the bridge numbers?
Yes, we are. So for the revised effort, CDOT staff did let us know that they were looking at adjusting the originally adopted target that would require us to then revise our own target. And we do have one member of staff from CDOT here as well, in case there are any questions that might relate to that performance measure area that I am not equipped to handle.
Okay, my concern, of course, is that we've been asked at CDOT to reduce our budget. And we're reducing our budget by about $70 million. And part of that is a reduction in the faster safety funds that are the funds that go to do bridge repairs and bridge improvements. I think it won't be this first year, but I think in the next 2 years or so, while we have this reduction in bringing in faster safety funds, it might affect this target. So wanting to call that out. It's been frustrating to us. We've tried to figure out how to backfill it. I don't think there's been a scheme yet to backfill, but one of the reasons we're reducing the safety faster funds is because we're bumping up against the Tabor limit. It's an enterprise. Wanted to just make that comment, and others on CDOT might have other information they want to add, but wanted to just make that clear that if we don't reach this target, part of it is the reason that we're reducing funds to make that target.
Thank you very much. Other comments or questions? Yes, Director Silverstein.
Yes, thank you. And my question is not about the goals, but it's just a curiosity. How do our deaths and injuries, other work in that area? You know, we see these numbers, and we, you know, death a day essentially is awful. How do we compare with similar sized cities or other locations? Has work been done in that area? I'd be very interested to learn.
Only done some high-level checks of other areas. I will say at a national level, the number of fatalities continue to increase, especially non-motorized fatalities in not just our region, but nationally. Part of the reporting that comes out of this federal area, though, there are a number of dashboards available that allow MPOs and state DOTs to review how either the particular region or their state are doing. So that could be something that we follow up with, is at least at a state level, see what trends we're seeing, especially in terms of the rate targets that help with the VMT normalization, but a check on that. So can follow up a little bit on that.
That'd be excellent. Thank you.
Shelley Cook.
Thank you, Chair. First, I'd want to echo Commissioner Stewart's comments. And, you know, the progress we've seen on those bridge condition reports is because of faster, thank goodness. And I think of Joe Rice every time I see it. But so how vulnerable we are in terms of cuts to that particular fund is just too bad. I did have a question about the safety, though. So, Alvin, you guys launched that really excellent crash data dashboard. Is it your sense, or do you have information to show how people are using it? Are they using it to its potential?
Yes, we've received a number of anecdotes from local member governments that are using it on a number of their own studies, leveraging it in their own Safe Streets and Roads for All work. And we also want to leverage it ourselves for our own exploration of a regional application for SS4A. So we do have a number of anecdotes from our local member governments that they are leveraging it. And we have received some outreach from local press as well. So we are excited to see that they're, at least anecdotally through the grapevine, we're hearing that it is being used.
Thank you.
Executive Director Rex first, and then we'll go to Director Holguin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. I love the Joe Rice reference, by the way. That's awesome. I just, one of the anomalies that was on that one graphic that looks at the fatalities, you know, it is the only really statistic that kind of went up during COVID. And, you know, it tends to lead, I mean, at least anecdotally, that it was speed related, right? A lot of our crashes are. And I just wonder if there's also, if staff's aware of kind of the split between like limited access facility fatalities versus arterial or local street fatalities. Just interested. And if you don't have it now, that's fine. I'd like to get it.
No, don't have it at the moment, but it is something that we're able to use through our Regional Vision Zero story map. That does use a little bit older data, but we could do a quick analysis through some of the other tools that we have available to see what that looks like.
Thank you. Director Hoagie.
Thank you, Chair. I'm trying to figure out how to formulate this question. It might be more, not necessarily an answer for now. When we look at did we achieve previous targets? And the elephant in the room is that for the 2022, 2023, we haven't. And the recognition that there will be potentially less funding at the state level to support, are we setting up ourselves to fail in 2025 given the track record? And also the recognition that this is a multi-stakeholder that requires action, not just from the state, cities, municipalities, the public, and is there a pathway to getting to achieving some of these targets in 2025, or are we just setting up to fail?
I appreciate the question. I think we'd like to see what that 2024 data looks like in terms of our most recent achievement. Is it a coincidence or is it a pattern in terms of achieving those targets? Sorry, I lost my train of thought during that response. For the federal targets, we do, like I mentioned, try to balance the adopted targets that we have as a region with realistic available data. If we do end up seeing in that 2024 year that we continue to not meet those targets, especially at the number especially across all 5 areas that we're seeing, we could look at an exploration of different methodologies for those targets that still help us in our aspirational Vision Zero for the region, but also reflect potentially fewer financial resources and fewer financial resources.
Okay, I've got a couple of folks in the queue. Jacob?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Baker. Just kind of add on to Alva's answer to your question. Director Olguin, I think there's some good news and some bad news. The bad news is that, yes, this is like turning the Titanic. These federal targets are short-term by nature. It is a rolling 5-year average, as Alvin said. Of those rolling 5 years, 4 of them are already determined. Our ability to affect change on these annual rolling 5-year targets is almost zero, and I'm just being honest about that. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It is a federal requirement. It is important, but it's hard to see that change on an annualized basis. What we're really looking for is over time, are we starting to turn the Titanic? And I think the good news is that the culture of safety, the planning around safety is becoming more institutionalized. And I think of the Safe Streets and Roads for All program, where a lot of your local governments, a lot of jurisdictions around the region, around the country are now doing Vision Zero plans or safe system plans, getting grants from Safe Streets and Roads for All to do that planning work. And so I think it is incumbent upon all of us, the limited dollars that we will have, especially if they become more limited, to spend those in the most effective way to really promote that culture and the implementation of safety. So that's where I think some of the potential is.
Director Mulvey.
Yeah, as a DRCOG alternate here, my focus is on some of the projects that we approve as an MPO, and what Mr. Rex mentioned was also on my mind. So I have 2 questions, and I don't know that the answers are available now, but I'd be interested in understanding, do we track the crash data performance and the trends as against the projects, and whether or not there's a trend on particular arterials or roadways that track with the projects that are geared towards implementing those. And equally, whether or not we track arterials versus non-arterials, CDOT versus non-CDOT. My other question is related to, you know what, I'm going to hold the other question because it's super weedsy, so sorry.
No problem. So in terms of tracking, part of the TIP application process does include a safety category that project sponsors respond to. We are looking at hopefully revising some of those questions, the criteria we use in the next TIP call for projects during the policy discussions, just leveraging some new work that has come out of taking action on Regional Vision Zero and just where we are as a region in since those 4 years. We don't track like maybe post-project implementation as well, but with our new crash data dashboard, if there was an interest in seeing maybe some potential projects that had safety included in their scope, doing some checks on those is more available now with the tools that we have available to us, but it isn't something we've historically done on a consistent basis.
Okay, the other question, and I don't think there's an answer for it, is do we track causes of accidents? So it sort of ties into the other question on the data, and I appreciate that we can possibly get a correlation metric from that data that you just referenced, but do we also, since we get the crash data from CDOT and state police reports, TARs, do we also track the causative factors? So is it speed? Is it roadway design? Is it roadway condition? Is it traffic? Too many cars on the road, therefore many bumper, that kind of causative factor. So that's the other thought in my mind. Thank you.
Yeah, again, the agency hasn't historically done tracking like that. It is available to us in the data that we receive from CDOT, and with the crash data dashboard, we have put in a number of filters that you can look at the potential cause of a crash. It has historically been something that we've leaned on our local member governments or our partners to do. It hasn't been something we've leaned into as much, but with the upcoming regional SS-FRAE application, we would like to know a little more about what are maybe some of those regional trends and speak to that at a regional level. And then I should also note that we did do an active modes crash report a year or two back that did look at some of the most common crashes that were occurring in our region and the types of facilities that we saw those types of crashes on.
Skylar McKinley.
Yeah, hi, Skylar with AAA. Just because it's germane to this conversation, last week my organization, which runs the nation's most cited, most well-respected traffic safety research organization, issued our report studying why there's been the 80% rise since 2009 in pedestrian fatalities. Of course, for all of us, these are where the public health alarm bells are ringing, right? Especially when it comes to infrastructure investments. What that report determined from an analysis of the FARS data over the past decade plus since 2009 is that almost all of that increase in fatalities occurs on urban arterial roads at night, right? So it is almost exclusively with these pedestrian fatalities an infrastructure question. That data took an additional equity examination on this and found that the vast majority of those fatalities happened 4 miles from the urban core in areas that were historically, economically, and socially disadvantaged. So we are taking a bold stance as a national organization saying, when you're making these infrastructure investments for pedestrians, where we have seen a striking rise in fatalities, it's to look at those communities, because that's where the delta in deaths have occurred.
Thank you. Jacob?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Baker. One of our goals of our Crash Data Consortium was really to dig into more of the crash data, and to your point, Director Mulvey, some of the causes and some of the issues around crashes and patterns, around types of crashes in particular locations. So just a reminder, we're actually going to have an update on the Crash Data Consortium later in the agenda today.
Thank you. Commissioner Adams.
Thank you. I will send to Executive Director Rex the study right now, which is available at AAAfoundation.org, but I'll send the link and then I'm sure staff can distribute.
Was there any other hands up in the queue I saw? I did want to just say that I know that for projects, to Director Mulvey's question, many of the projects, when they're being proposed, they have data on crashes. Now, what I don't know is if they're checking afterward. A lot of the local jurisdictions or partners in many of these major projects have done their due diligence in order to get the funding. And they've researched the number of crashes and fatalities and causes, things like that. What I don't know, like I said, is whether or not they're being cross-referenced and being tracked as maybe goals or improvements after the project's completed. Any other discussions? I would entertain a motion at some point during this discussion, but I don't want to curtail the discussion because this is really, really good. All right, may I have a motion? Vince?
Chair, I move to recommend to the board that the Board of Directors adopt the 2025 safety targets and revised four-year bridge condition targets for the Metropolitan Planning Organization area as part of federal performance-based planning and programming requirements.
I have a motion. Can I have a second? Director Silverstein seconds. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Seeing none, that motion carries. Thank you. We're going to move on to discussion items. Number 6, this is the Parker Road, Colorado State Highway 83 Multimodal Corridor Study. Jacob, good morning.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, RTC. I mostly have the easy job of introducing our speakers, but I do want to introduce the topic as well. As the region completes and undertakes major corridor studies, we do like to bring those to you and sort of bring you up to speed on some of the work that's being done, particularly this study, which is just about completed and has some very specific recommendations. I think you all are familiar with this corridor. You know the importance of this corridor. It's an important corridor to us. It's one of the major corridors in the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan, both in its own right and because it's also part of our defined regional bus rapid transit network within the plan. Arapahoe County has taken the lead along with several stakeholders with funding from DRCOG through our Transportation Improvement Program to undertake the Parker Road Corridor Improvement Study. So as that study is wrapping up, we wanted to bring this to you and give you an update on where this study is and what it's starting to recommend. So to help us do that, I'd like to introduce Jim Kotzer, who's the Transportation Division Manager at Arapahoe County.
Hey, good morning. I'm joined by Stacy Schur with David Evans and Associates, Project Engineer. So great to have you, or great to be with you this morning. So we're going to talk about, I want to talk with you about the project, and this is a very important corridor, as Jacob mentioned. The study went from Hamden on the south end all the way to Mississippi. And as you traverse this 6-mile corridor, you go through unincorporated Arapahoe County, go through Aurora, you go through parts of Denver, and then probably back to the county or back to the city. So it's a really important corridor as it connects towns, Parker to the south, Franktown, eventually get down to Colorado Springs. The project funding is from the DRCOG TIP project. And the funding partners include Arapahoe County and the city of Aurora, and then we have the federal component. This is a state highway, so the state highway 83, CDOT maintains, they plow it, they provide traffic operations. In town of Parker, the town of Parker will take over the signal maintenance highway. So the purpose of the project is to address these elements here. I'm not going to read through this whole statement, but as this area has been developed, it's changed in characteristics over time. It's become a safety challenge for residents that live in the area and those that drive along it. So the purpose of the improvements is to improve safety for all users, not just focusing on the car-centric, but to enhance multimodal connectivity, improve travel experience for people walking, biking, and using mobility devices and riding transit. So as we looked at the recommendations that were being put forward, transportation improvements needed to address safety, as I mentioned, multimodal connectivity. We wanted to remove Parker Road as a barrier, as a lot of traffic is driving along this corridor, going very fast. It's very hard to traverse. We're looking for improvements to provide connectivity across and onto this corridor. And we also wanted to improve the travel experience. Project goals, so those projects that were recommended, we wanted them to maintain or improve vehicular traffic operations. So once again, that wasn't our focus, but we wanted to look at those improvements that would at least maintain or improve. And we also wanted to serve the regional mobility and local accessibility for all modes. And then we wanted to incorporate public feedback. But we didn't want to do this in a vacuum. So we wanted, here's what we did. So we went and talked to the public in a virtual town hall meeting on April. Great participation. At that meeting, we introduced a project and then gathered feedback. And then we had an in-person open house meeting at the Stampede in June and July. Had great participation. CDOT joined us. Aurora joined us, and our other partners, Denver, did as well. And we presented a draft recommendation. Had some great feedback at that meeting. We also had 2 community focus meetings. These were online, but we had some robust discussions. There's very passionate people in the 4 square mile area and along this corridor. They gave us some great input. We gathered their input, and it's reflected here in the recommendation. Also, we had some great participation from agencies. And CDOT, as I mentioned earlier, Aurora joined us, of course. City and County of Denver, RTD has been participating, DRCOG as well. Formed a PAC group, and we had 4 meetings where we had elected officials or executives at that meeting. Those meetings, and what we're trying to do is garner support all along the way. These projects aren't going to be done by one entity. It's going to be that has to move projects forward and has some support at the executive level to make those happen. Of course, we had technical advisory committee meetings. Those were robust conversations and were more frequent than the. With that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Stacey and into the alternative.
Thanks. So the alternatives evaluation process was a tiered process with more detail as we progressed, and we are now down in the phasing and prioritization. We've come up with recommendations and are pulling together an implementation plan. So the alternatives evaluation started with 16 categories of high-level improvement concepts, and from that we came up with 50 improvement options that were more location specific, so at specific locations along the corridor. And after level 2, we had 36 options recommended. So those are were considered for project implementation. We had 3 options needing further study. So they may be beneficial for our study goals, but need more analysis and coordination in order to determine whether they would be recommended. And 11 options were not recommended. So the impacts were too high or the benefits were too low related to our needs and goals. Wanted to touch on the bus rapid transit. So Parker Road is identified as a BRT corridor by multiple agencies. Future BRT is to be studied along farther north than what this study even looked at, from downtown Denver to 9 Mile Station. And because of that, after level 1 screening, which we had BRT as part of that high level, the project team moved that BRT to a recommendation without evaluating further, just basically moving it to that future BRT study that will identify, kind of get into the weeds, as we were talking about earlier, get into the operation of BRT stations, costs, and next steps. So for this study, we did include BRT as an evaluation criteria. So looking at projects and making sure that they don't preclude future BRT was one of our evaluation criteria. And we have it discussed with recommendations in the report about how the projects will support and build towards BRT. So taking those options that we're moving forward, we combined them into 16 potential projects. So looking at location, making sure that the different elements were connected in physically or in operations, making sure they're a manageable size for funding opportunities, and then also logical construction project limits. So if these moves forward going into construction, making sure that you wouldn't have a project that to the public appears, you know, like it's just the corridors under construction at all times. So we looked at the projects and assigned an overall priority of higher, medium, or less priority, looking at purpose, need, and goals. So those that Jim talked about with safety, multimodal connectivity, and multimodal experience. Also looking at timing and effectiveness. So looking at ease of implementation, traffic operations impacts, and magnitude of cost. And then we separately assigned a potential time frame for construction or implementation for short, mid, or long term, as seen here. So those time frames focused on ease of implementation and cost. So looking at right-of-way, environmental impacts, coordination needs, and construction complexity were included in that ease of implementation. We also are looking at potential funding sources. We did not assign specific sources since grants and programs change all the time, as we see, and they both go away as well as new opportunities arise. And so instead of putting specific grants or funding sources, we identified types and categories for each of the projects. So what you see here in bold is what we identified, and these are just examples of funding sources now. So we did complete this under budget and the study itself. So we are using the remaining contract budget allocated to provide more information for the agencies to move forward. So we're doing analysis, more concept layouts, more detail, not getting into preliminary design or anything like that, but enough where we could get better cost information. And it's these 4 selected projects along the corridor. And these were selected by the agency core team as projects that they're interested in as far as getting more information to move forward. So going through the projects, the higher priority projects are listed here. So remember, the prioritization was based on safety, multimodal connections, and multimodal experience. So you see 6 projects here, and they include 4 new controlled pedestrian crossings. And because those are determined to be higher priority along the corridor, and those are based on distance between existing signals. So, but also land use across Parker Road. So we looked at, there's areas in which there are generators such as high density housing on one side of Parker Road, and then commercial retail or parks on the other side of Parker Road. And so looking at that, both existing and future land use for crossing locations, additional crossing locations, and also observations and input from the public, as well as data on where people are crossing and they're not at signals. And so not just looking at crash data, but looking, because if somebody made it across fine and weren't hit, that's still a location that needs to be taken care of as far as the safety improvement. I wanted to note the most common recommendation is you see here intersection corner modifications. And what those are Parker Road is at a skew, it's at an angle. And so a lot of the intersection corners are very large, and it is a state highway. So it has been built traditionally with acceleration lanes and right turn lanes, really that car-centric mode. And so looking at each intersection and tightening up the corners and removing those free rights, those high-speed free rights when possible, when it would not introduce a new safety issue like really long queues that would introduce new rear-end crashes. But really with the intent of slowing the speed of turning vehicles, shortening the crossing distance for pedestrians and bicyclists at the intersections, and increasing visibility of those pedestrians and bicyclists and transit users who are crossing at the intersections. Also, you'll see we have some median on Parker Road. There are areas that median has been installed, but much of the area does not have median. It has a two-way left turn lane, and so putting median in the areas with the two-way left turn lanes. So medium priority projects, there are 5, including shared use path. So you can see that has short or midterm, and that's really because we're looking at the project itself is looking at a continuous shared use path on both sides of Parker Road with signage and striping improvements at driveways, and really getting that continuous, hopefully detached path the entire way. And so that would be implemented with development or smaller projects likely, so that's why you see the short and midterm. It includes transit improvements that would move the corridor towards that BRT with adjusting the routes and transit signal priority. And then other, like I said, the right turn signalization and intersection corner modifications and bike lanes. So less priority projects, we want to note that these are not low priority, they're just lesser priority than the other projects comparatively along the corridor. But there are 5 of those, and really these are lesser priority because they are higher cost, which means they're probably longer term, and they also have a little bit lower multimodal benefit. At the bottom, you see here corridor electric vehicle charging stations. We did identify through the study 4 locations. Potentially, they are in locations where it's parking lots or development that would help with EV longer term parking and things like that. And that's really an opportunity to work with property owners to move those forward. So upcoming next steps. Really, this is meant to be a guide for moving forward with project funding and implementation. So we are documenting everything in an implementation plan, which will be a report that will be posted on the webpage. We're doing stakeholder presentations like this, but also to Arapahoe County and Aurora. And like I said, we are advancing those analysis and further conceptual design of selected projects. Oh, that's her up.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any questions for Jim or Stacy? Director Eubanks, I'm sorry, Adams.
First of all, thank you for that presentation. And as a commissioner, CDOT commissioner for District 3, which does include Arapahoe, and as a person who lives in unincorporated, you know, in your first slide or early slides, you made a comment that, you had a comment that looked like there had been some community meetings. And one of the things that I know we were all concerned about in the community when you did the project down Iliff, I believe, and the comments I heard from a lot of our, I guess, neighbors and other constituents, one, a lot of confusion about the project that was done, very concerned about how long it took to get it done. So with this project, one of the things that dawned on me as you were describing this was I was saying, well, this seems like it's down the path a bit. And I looked at your comment about community involvement. So I'm curious, how, when you're doing your community involvement about this, how are you notifying the communities? Are you doing it through HOAs? Are you doing it through other sources? What's the mechanism? Because I don't think my community, which is that Cherry Creek Country Club community, I don't think we are as knowledgeable about your plans for Parker Road, and we are very close to this. In fact, some of the corners and intersections you're describing are intersections and crossings that I personally walk. So I know we'll all be interested in it, but what's your mechanism for making sure that the message gets out to all the communities, not just the, the boards and the commission? So please, if you could speak to that.
Yeah, great question, appreciate it. So the county, we use multiple sources, of course, Facebook, you got the standard. And we also use Nextdoor, so we communicate that out to the HOAs that subscribe to that. If necessary, we'll sometimes send out mailings to adjacent property owners, but that's typically how we do it. Of course, we use our media blast if you're following Arapahoe County on Twitter or X.
Well, I can't speak for other communities, but I can tell you that in my community, Nextdoor is not an effective way to get the message out. In fact, I would say, for the most part, they are negative. In fact, we're even encouraged to not use Nextdoor for things like reporting crimes or doing other things. So it's not something that most of my neighbors actually look to. So I would encourage you to really approach in my case, approach the HOAs and really get them engaged, because that's probably the best method to get the message out to some of us.
Yeah, we appreciate that, and it sounds like we did along Parker Road and also along Iliff. So we're happy to talk after, Commissioner. Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Director Silverstein.
Thank you for the presentation. You mentioned at the very beginning the bus rapid transit kind of interplay with your work, and you've sort of, hey, we punted, your analysis because so much is going on there. But in the rest of the work, are you assuming that BRT is going to be part of your baseline so that the development patterns that, may result from the work in these recommendations build off that versus, oh boy, we've done all this work and now BRT is going to come through and, oh boy, all those, those capital investments become for naught. Could you talk about that?
Yes, exactly. So it wasn't necessarily, we know that this is a BRT corridor, and what it was punted for was getting into the weeds of, is it going to be center running, side running, all of those types of operational things that if we started looking at that, we're basically doing a BRT study, and we wanted to be able to utilize the funding for this as an overall corridor for all modes, since that BRT study is already planned to occur. Now, given that, we did assume that there will be BRT, and so that's why we used it as an evaluation criteria, as far as we didn't want to do something that would then make it harder for BRT in the future. And so several places we looked at where we would want to maybe even narrow Parker Road, and because of that evaluation criteria, they are actually in the not recommended, because then there's less opportunity for maybe an BRT lane in the future if we pulled the curbs in and then suddenly you don't have that opportunity. If that's the way it's going to go, we do not know, right? So, so that's kind of an example of how it was used. And then we made sure to talk about it it was a subject at all of our public and community focus groups, as far as this will be looked at in the future, and that this is a BRT corridor to be studied. And also looking at, like I said, in documentation, we felt like the transit improvements that we recommended are moving towards BRT. And then we have several recommendations at intersections for new bus stops. And that type, we have recommendations that looking at the design of those should consider those as BRT stops and stations in the future. So that's the type of considerations we made with this.
Jacob Rieger.
Yeah, just to add to Stacy's excellent answer about that, typically the first step in a kind of formal project planning and project development process for bus rapid transit corridors and alternatives analysis study, this is not that. This is a corridor study that helps set the stage for an alternatives analysis study, and we're following that track on several corridors in this region that are bus rapid transit corridors within the long-range transportation plan. So typically in these initial corridor studies, you're kind of learning things, existing conditions, public engagement, other things about the corridor that really do help set the stage for an alternatives analysis study. So something we watched for as part of this corridor study to make sure, as Stacy eloquently said, that we're not precluding bus rapid transit, that we're keeping in mind that that's coming, and that decisions and recommendations in this corridor study at least help facilitate that, and at the very least don't preclude bus rapid transit in the future. As part of the federal grant that we won from the US DOT Build America Bureau, we will be looking specifically at several bus rapid transit corridors in the region, including this one, to learn additional things to help accelerate the planning and formal project development processes for BRT in those corridors, including this one.
Thank you very much. Director Mulvey.
I want to thank you for this and thank everybody else at DRCOG, because in the past 3 months, I've had occasion to drive this corridor about 4 times, and from Denver all the way down to Parker. And one of the things I noticed was this specific corridor has much worse traffic, much worse lighting, and much worse road conditions, and much less safe crossings and fewer EV charging stations. So thank you for considering all that, and in particular, knowing that people commute from Denver or the South Metro region up and down this corridor, it is important to maintain and improve roadway surface and vehicle traffic conditions as part of this, because there's only a bus, and people who have no choice but to drive will have to use that road surface. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Yes. Director Guzman.
Just really quickly, there's like 3 different studies that are all about this particular corridor. The Arapahoe County one is probably the most comprehensive, but the town of Parker also mentions in their study that they want to have control over the traffic lights. And I just have a question. At Mississippi, Denver controls the traffic light. South to probably the Dam Road, I would imagine, is all of the city of Aurora, and then it's the state. Is that correct? I'm just trying to understand the links, because where is Parker and all of this saying that they want to have control of the traffic lights along the corridor? Their study separate from yours.
That's right.
I missed that.
Town of Parker picks up at E470 right there along Parker Road, and it goes down through Stroh Ranch, maybe even to the. So there's quite a bit, maybe 10, 12 traffic signals along that section of Parker Road. So they're maintaining that. A lot more dense traffic signals than what you. That's why they're controlling.
Thank you. And just one comment. Thank you for the information about the bus stops and why they would make sense along that corridor. The 3 additional ones that you talk about with pullouts or with moving it just past an intersection for the safety of the bus, that's appreciated. It keeps our drivers and our operators safe as well.
Very good. I did have one more thing to add.
Please, go ahead.
DRCOG put out a set aside for a couple projects, and the county applied to them. So we were successful in getting a project for innovative mobility planning and livable centers for the corridor of Florida, looking at it as a multimodal corridor, especially Parker Road and Florida intersection in the study has been identified as needing several improvements. Looking forward to working with DRCOG on those set-aside projects.
Yeah, that's a library, a shopping center, a big liquor store, and residential. So that's a lot of traffic, both pedestrian and multimodal across. Thank you. All right, with that, we're going to go ahead. Thank you very much for your presentation. We're going to go on to discussion item, agenda item number 7, the Crash Data Consortium update. And we've got Eric Bratton, Senior Safety Planner with DRCOG. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Board or Commissioners. My name is Eric Bratton, Senior Safety Planner here at DRCOG, and I'm here to provide an update on a project we've called our Crash Data Consortium, which has been a 2-year project that's been completed and is rolling into the regular regional Vision Zero work of DRCOG. So I've spoken to this before, but this is a project that was kicked off in 2022. We had received a 405C Traffic Records Improvement Grant from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, which we applied for in 2022, received and kicked off for federal fiscal year 2023, and we renewed this and applied again in federal fiscal year 2024. The goal of this is really to investigate and demonstrate the value of such a group, to identify needs of the region, when working with stakeholders to identify common issues with crash data collection, processing, and analysis. And this has included a great number of stakeholders from local government to this, multiple state agencies, law enforcement agencies across the region, fire districts, lots of folks in the area who have an interest in traffic safety. One thing to note, and Alvin mentioned this as well, while we talk about crash data, we always want to mention that, we're talking about real people, real communities. We want to keep that centered. And as we talk about this 405C grant, one important thing about why we mentioned for these years 2023, 2024, is this particular grant is a one-year grant. It's not meant to be a permanent funding source. They're really meant to pilot projects or do individual investigations. And so, fortunately, we were able to get it for these 2 years, and fortunately, we were able to continue this work. In 2023, we really did a lot of engagement with stakeholders, doing a number of surveys, tons of interviews with stakeholders across the region and at the state level. With this, we did some workshops and brought folks together to talk about what we've learned, develop an inventory of crash data sources, analysis goals that our stakeholders have, what they're looking to use the data for. And we met as a group on three separate occasions. In 2020, in federal fiscal year 2024, we continued the stakeholder engagement, talked with more stakeholders, did lots of follow-up with other stakeholders we previously talked to, remediated these documents that we had completed for the state statute, had a survey for our stakeholders end of the year to see what they learned, how it was working for them, and importantly, created a final report detailing recommendations and strategies for moving progress in improving crash data in the region, as well as, again, holding several more of these meetings, full group meetings. The key deliverables that we had throughout this project were that crash data inventory, a needs assessment, which was based off of the inventory, end of year survey, where we, again, tried to see how things are working for the stakeholders and what they were learning and getting from this project, and the final report. And the inventory, needs assessment, and final report are all publicly available on the DRCOG website. I'm not going to get into the details of all of these, but just the structure of some of these documents entail the detailed description of the stakeholder engagement process we followed for the inventory, the data sources that we heard from stakeholders. One interesting thing, though, is pretty universally we heard that almost all stakeholders using crash data use multiple sources, whether that's a local government using their own PD data and DRCOG data, their PDA data, CDOT data, DRCOG data, maybe from their county, maybe going up to FARs. So there's lots of different data that's flowing through the system. Learned about the analysis objectives that they are looking to achieve, the issues and challenges that they're experiencing, and this is all detailed in the report and the appendices that accompany. The needs assessment was based off of this inventory and subsequent conversations, detailed specific needs identified in the region, including some preliminary strategies, resources, and barriers that we identified to help address those. A cross-reference back to the inventory, so if anyone reads that and they want more information, they can follow that up. The main areas in which we identified improvements could be created at the regional level would be in the geospatial data, the quality of the data and completeness of it, the timeliness of the data, capacity as an organization or consortium to make improvements, integration of data, because there's lots of different ways that the data could inform other studies, but the way to link it is limited, and accessibility, letting folks know who wants to use the data, how to use it, where they can access it, and how to use it. On the survey, this was conducted online, and one thing that I want to note is that while most of the people who took the survey and were participating in the consortium had some familiarity with DRCOG, some were brand new to understanding what DRCOG was as an organization through working through the consortium. And with this, we had a diverse participation of agencies, municipal governments, county governments, our law enforcement partners, and more. All who took it said that the consortium helped them understand crash data and the processes in the area, in the region, and the state level better. And more than half had said that in a couple of years they had seen improvements in data quality. The report really touches on the results of all of this and the investigation detailing of the data, inventorying the needs, and coming with ideas and strategies to help address some of these challenges. We did have 3 performance measures for the grant, one of which was related to the completeness of data related to the geospatial. And we did have that improvement here from more than, it's usually about 50% of records not having data to only 16% of these records not having the latitude and longitude. One was to integrate data from just having the latitude and longitude or mapping them as these XY points to connecting them to what's called a linear referencing system, which is a geospatial information system process, but it's something that with the grant we were able to get a license to a specialized software to help us develop this. And our goal was to link 25% of records. We were able to link 59% in our first round. And improving the accessibility of data, we have historically shared the crash data DRCOG processes on the regional data catalog, and our goal was to increase the downloads of this by 25%. And over the time period of the last federal fiscal year, we had an increase of 64%. The outcomes that we are seeking through the implementation of the final report are really an improved data quality. Largely, that's more accurate latitude and longitude. Largely less missing data. That's one of the big challenges is just some fields are not included, some things are not required, and so they're not filled out consistently. Having an improved timeliness of the data so that it can be in the hands of data users more quickly to make these sorts of traffic safety decisions. Improving the access of the data, including engendering a greater understanding of how to get data and how to use data. And there are some aspects of it which are not totally accessible to all users that we're hoping to be able to get in the hands of more people to make more informed decisions, as well as increasing the number and depth of our partnerships, bringing in specifically more law enforcement into the mix. I'm grateful that we've had the opportunity to work with about a quarter of the law enforcement agencies in the Denver region, as well as Colorado State Patrol, but wanting to increase that participation and understanding of their challenges. Also bringing in more fields such as the medical profession with medical examiners, coroners, and others who work with this in a different capacity but can inform the infrastructure and traffic safety discussions. Broad recommendations of the report include improving the general statewide crash reporting, a little more specialized looking at ways to improve the location generation, the location reporting. Some critical data elements that are not required but are really useful for analysis, looking to see how those can be improved in the collection. Improving with the processing to speed it up and make sure that things are caught when they might be challenges and issues. And increasing the analyst access and competency with using the data, and sustaining and expanding the organization and the data consortium. And the report, while these are the broad 6 strategies, each has multiple recommendations, each has a number of strategies accompanying them. While not all of the strategies or recommendations fall directly under this flow chart, it's kind of the general cascading effect of this is recommendations in the report which hope to improve and standardize the input coming in from law enforcement. In some ways, and some of the ways that this is done is there are issues with the way that software connects with the state and agency to agency in the state, which is really important to know because a lot of the agencies are, in my opinion, they are doing a good job collecting data. And one thing I also want to note is when law enforcement is responding to a crash, collecting data is not their first priority, nor should it be. They're there to work with the people who are involved to make sure that they're safe. If people are not safe, getting other emergency medical services to them and clearing the roadway to not cause further crashes. That said, when they are in that phase where they're collecting the data, there are barriers sometimes in the software that they use, sometimes in the level of training that officers have, even just the types of officers or troopers who are responding. If it's someone who's from a dedicated traffic unit and respond to crashes all day long, every day, they've got to have a higher understanding of how the very complicated form works compared to another officer who might respond to a crash once a month, once every 3 months. So there's definitely quality effects in there, not borne out by the officer themselves, but just their exposure and the level of complexity with it. The idea is if we can standardize and improve this input, that should entail less time needing to be processed when it gets to the Department of Revenue, when it gets to Department of Transportation, when it gets to DRCOG, when local governments have access to their own, and when it's often used by vendors, other consultants using the data to help inform plans. And the ultimate goal of this part would be to this higher quality crash data available sooner. This is just a selection of some of the strategies that we've identified in the report. There's definitely a lot more, but this is kind of a preview of some of the things that can be found in there, such as improving the software that's used, requiring additional fields to be completed before they can be accepted by the Department of Revenue, working on facilitating training with law enforcement or partners on how to collect the data or process the data, seeing where there are issues with data being transmitted that's being lost along the way, because importantly, when officers are collecting data, if there's problems with the way softwares connect, we're losing the hard work that we're getting from law enforcement, and we don't want that. Continue to work specifically with law enforcement, see what's working well for them, what's not, and what challenges they're experiencing, and what ways we can improve the experience for them as they're an important part of this process. And again, working with medical field professionals who have a different role in this, but a crucial role in helping to identify issues with impairments and non-motorist crashes. Next steps for the consortium are, as they've been rolled into the Regional Vision Zero work of DRCOG, is really to develop a more of an implementation framework for this. The report, the priorities, or the strategies are given a rough timeline of short-term, medium, long-term, but they're not prioritized in the report. So we are having a workshop on Thursday with stakeholders to work on prioritizing strategies, identifying barriers, identifying who could be partners in which one. So prioritizing strategies and determining potential action leaders or support partners. Continuing this meeting series. Workshop we have on Thursday is one of these. We also have a few more throughout the year. And again, continue to work and build these relationships, particularly among law enforcement, medical field, and the partners that we currently have in the consortium. One more note, while this isn't necessarily in the consortium itself, but just kind of brought up from earlier conversation, a lot of this was really to improve the quality of the data that we have, that our local governments have access to, and improving the timeliness of that data. We do have identified in our Vision Zero action plan, taking action on Regional Vision Zero, a high priority goal of doing more regional analysis on the data, identifying these crash patterns, linking them to the crash profiles described in the plan, as well as an update to our regional high injury network. And we have a project that is kicking off. Our regional planning and development team are kicking off to work with some University of Colorado students to help look at different examples of high injury networks across the region, across the country, inform some best practices on that. And so I'm looking forward to some of those results we can hopefully share soon about what we're learning from this data. And with that, I welcome any questions.
Questions? Yes, Director Mulvey.
Thank you. This is the third time in one meeting where I'm so gratified that DRCOG staff is doing proactively that we need, and that's been on my mind, so thank you for that. I have one question, and that is, along the west side of the metro region, of DRCOG's region, and also along the far east side in Denver South, there's a lot of wildlife interface with the urban area. So I'm wondering if there's any way data could be pulled from DPW about wildlife incidents, because a lot of times police aren't called and it never makes it to a CDOT report.
Thank you, Director. Yeah, that's a great idea, and I think that we could reach out to them. I know in the crash reports, so the crash type that CDOT generates, if there is a crash report, wild animal, I believe, is one of the crash types, or something that can be identified as a contributing factor. But yeah, I can reach out to them and see if there's additional supplemental data that can help inform some of this work. Thank you for that, Director.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to the next item under discussion items. This is number 8, the Ride Alliance update. We've got Mallory Miller Senior Project Manager. Good morning, Mallory.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. So my name is Mallory. I'm here to talk with you all today about the Right Alliance project. So this is my first time presenting to this committee, but I've actually been at DRCOG for 4 years this June. Prior to this position, I worked over in the Area Agency on Aging and managed the Human Services Transportation Program over there. So while I was in that role, I had the opportunity to work on Right Alliance and understand firsthand the challenges that providers and clients are facing. Okay, that feels better. I'm a little shorter. Okay, so why is something like Right Alliance needed? So last year in 2024, there were 11,966 trip denials in the DRCOG region. This is just for DRCOG contractors, so it does not capture the full accurate picture of trip denials. The true number is probably much higher, but that is almost 12,000 times that an older adult couldn't get to the doctor, couldn't get to a grocery store, or wherever else it is that they needed to go. Right now, there is no coordination between providers, so it is up to clients to understand the service areas, the funding, the different service areas, the eligibility requirements, what types of vehicles they have, what types of trips they provide. So it puts a significant burden on clients, and they might have to use upward of 2 or 3 transit providers to get their transportation needs met. Additionally, a lot of transit providers have a wait list for their services. And the reason they have a wait list is because the older adult population in Colorado is rapidly growing. So by 2030, which is just 5 short years away, the Colorado State Demographer's Office estimates there will be a 27.8% increase in the older adult population. So this is 1 in 5 persons in the state will be over the age of 60, or almost 1.2 million people over 65. So this is a very new demographic for Colorado. We are one of the fastest rapidly aging states in the entire nation, and it speaks to a need to identify solutions that can help reduce those trip denials and help older adults and people with disabilities get to where they need to go. And so that's where Right Alliance comes in. So Right Alliance isn't, you know, a perfect solution, but it aims to help improve transportation services in the region by creating the Trip Exchange Hub to allow different transit providers to exchange trip and client information using transactional data specifications. And what that means is it'll create a no wrong door approach for clients seeking services. So a client could contact a single participating transit provider, give them their trip information, and even if that provider can't do it, they can send it into the Trip Exchange Hub so that other providers automatically receive that information and don't have to spend additional time calling that client, getting the same information over and over. It allows us to maximize the available resources in the region by allowing transit providers to keep using their current softwares and program models, but allows them to connect into each other and see, okay, this person has a trip request that's going the same way. I already have this other client I'm taking, so let's add them onto our vehicle, further maximize that vehicle's capacity and cost effectiveness. Right Alliance will also allow us to eliminate silos experienced by funding restrictions. So right now, clients have a very difficult time if they need to get across different county lines for medical appointments. And so it's up to the client to figure out, okay, this person could get me this far, but then now I need to figure out how I'm going to get the rest of the way there. So the Trip Exchange Hub and Right Alliance project could seamlessly coordinate that trip experience for that client. Right Alliance is not new to the Denver region. It started with the Mobility Services for All Americans grant, I think around 2012. This was led by the Denver Regional Mobility and Access Coalition, and through this grant, they developed the first iteration of the Trip Exchange Hub. The project was continued with the Veterans Transportation and Community Living Initiative grant. DRCOG ended up taking over this grant, and through this phase, they really built up the Trip Exchange Hub, had integrated providers. Everything was all set for pilot testing, and then the COVID-19 pandemic happened. So there was no trips to test at that time. Additionally, the software that was used, Route Match, ended up getting sold over to Uber, who later sold it to TripSpark. So at this point, the Trip Exchange Hub was turned off until more funding could become available. Funding opportunity presented itself through the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is established the Strengthening Mobility and Revolutionizing Transportation, or SMART grant. So this appropriates $100 million annually for 5 years for innovative transit projects across the nation. So DRCOG applied for stage 1 and received almost $1 million this last July. Stage 1 grants are limited to 18 months, so this will conclude in January 2026. And stage 1 is really focused on planning and information gathering. Because we received stage 1 funding, we are eligible to apply for stage 2, which is a 3-year grant opportunity with significantly more funds available, up to $15 million per award. And stage 2 is really focused on implementing it in mass scale and making it, a long-term reality in the Denver region. For this phase, we are working with consulting agencies, Demand Trans and Transit Plus. Both agencies previously worked on the Ride Alliance project in our past grant iterations. Demand Trans has actually built the original Trip Exchange Hub and helped develop transactional data specifications. Transit Plus is helping improve those transactional data specifications and has worked on similar projects such as the Ride No-Co project with North Front Range MPO. So their experience and knowledge of the Trip Exchange Hub and transactional data specifications is invaluable for project success. It is critical for Ride Alliance to have partners working together, otherwise there's no one to exchange trips. So these are providers that we have connected with thus far: RTD, Douglas County, Dr. Mack, North Front Range MPO, Via Mobility, City and County of Broomfield, and A Little Help. But we do anticipate that many more partners will become involved as the project progresses. So to walk through how we would work on the technical side. So these two charts depict a very high-level overview. So if we were to envision A, B, C, D, and E, all as transit providers. So the chart on the left shows how A, B, C, and D, and E could all connect without something like Ride Alliance or the Trip Exchange Hub. So in this model, A has to build and pay for 4 custom APIs in order to talk with these 4 other transit providers. So if some point down the line, C makes a slight change to their software, then all of these agencies all have to pay to update that API that connects them into C in order to keep exchanging trip and client information. So the model on the left without Ride Alliance or the Trip Exchange Hub is not sustainable, it's not cost effective, and eventually there's a limit into how many transit providers can connect with each other due to the high costs associated with modifying those APIs. The chart on the right shows how it would look using the Ride Alliance project, Trip Exchange Hub, and transactional data specifications. So in this model, A, B, C, D, and E are all connected into the hub through a single open API. So if B at some point makes a change to their software, the hub only needs to change this one API and it automatically communicates that out to the other providers. So it's a much more cost-effective method. There's almost limitless providers that can be connected in with this type of model. So while there's clear, financial benefits to something like Ride Alliance and the Trip Exchange Hub, there's also significant benefits for clients and staff at the transit agencies. So if we were to pretend there's someone named John who's 70 years old, normally John drives himself, he is low income, he doesn't have any social supports, and unfortunately John recently fell and broke a bone and has to go to physical therapy for the next couple of months. Again, John doesn't have anyone who he can call for rides, and he can't afford, a $40 one-way taxi ride to get to the doctor there and back 3 times a week for PT. So John calls his doctor, who connects him with a social worker, who refers him over to Dr. Mack for transportation information and assistance. Dr. Mack takes down some of John's demographics, like where he lives, how old he is, and gives him a few options of who he could call who might be able to help him out. So John calls the first provider, gives him all of his demographics tells them about his transportation needs, and unfortunately, they're on a wait list right now. So they get him added to the wait list, but they can't help him out. So John calls the next provider. He does the same thing, gives him all of his demographics, all of his transit needs, and unfortunately, while they're not on a wait list, they just don't have enough volunteer drivers right now to be able to do the trip. So John calls the last provider, gives him all his demographics, all his trip information, and fortunately, they are able to fulfill his trip needs and get him to physical therapy. But at this point, John has now spoken with about 4 different agencies to provide his demographics and trip information. This process has probably taken him a couple of hours, and John is likely feeling a little fearful about his future for when he can officially no longer drive again. Additionally, 3 different transit providers all took down this exact same information from John, and that reduced their ability to help other clients. So this scenario walks through what it would look like for John with stage 2 funding once Ride Alliance is fully implemented in the region. So John is in that same situation. He needs medical rides temporarily. He calls his doctor, refers him over to Dr. Mack. This time, Dr. Mack is able to access a web interface of the Trip Exchange Hub, take down all of John's demographic and trip information, and submit that into the Trip Exchange Hub. This time, transportation providers A, B, and C automatically receive this information and can quickly spend a couple minutes determining whether or not they can take that trip. Transportation provider C is able to fulfill the trip, but they no longer have to call John and get all that same demographic and trip information again. Instead, they automatically got that into their software system, and it allows them to automatically schedule the trip once they've determined they can take it. So this scenario was a much more pleasant experience for John. He's probably not feeling fearful about his transportation future, and only one transportation agency had to take down this trip and client information. So for stage 1, again, because it's focused on planning, not on full-scale implementation, our next steps for this phase are to get business or agreements or memorandum of understanding agreements signed with transit providers for participation in the Trip Exchange Hub. We're also looking to integrate a couple of providers into the Trip Exchange Hub to run a pilot program around November to test this with real clients in real trips and see how it functions. We'll also be looking to further enhance the Trip Exchange Hub so that there's additional data and reporting features that make it easier for providers. And then, of course, we will apply for stage 2 funding so that we can integrate additional providers, build out that web user interface access, and make this a reality in the DRCOG region and beyond, ideally. That is my presentation for y'all today. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Mallory. Any questions? See any questions? Oh, there, Director Adams.
So, Mallory, thank you. I love what you're talking about. I was in a conversation a long time ago with someone who is a handicapped person that had a similar idea as, knowing that RTD and others provide services for handicapped and other individuals. And their idea was to actually work with current share ride providers like Uber and Lyft. So why couldn't something like this be done by working a deal with them on some kind of a discounted basis so that we actually use their platform to do something similar to what you're describing?
I think, that is a slightly, while that is a huge need to have more options, especially on-demand options for folks who use paratransit services. And RTD does have that great program, Access on Demand, that connects folks with Uber and Lyft, but that is limited to the RTD service area. Ride Alliance is really looking to connect all the different options. So that allows us to say, Via Mobility is going, taking this client to Broomfield already, and this client hasn't been able to get a ride. They've been on a wait list for months. So instead, let's get this client added to Via's bus, maximize that capacity, and get them to where they need to go. In general, I think, there's a need to utilize multiple options and reliance on something like private agencies like Uber and Lyft they don't necessarily have those types of vehicles. So someone would need to provide those paratransit vehicles to agencies like Uber and Lyft and pay for then like the training of those drivers and all that goes into that.
I understand that. You know, it's just money and economics, right? I mean, someone's going to do it. Someone's going to get a return for it. It just seems to me that building a platform from a technology standpoint, supporting the platform with people and resources also takes money and resources, and certainly that's something that they already have in place. And they're not just the only ones. I mean, we just are more familiar with Uber and Lyft, but certainly if the incentives were there, people might be willing to make the investment themselves. And overall, it's a bigger issue than just DRCOG in our region in the metro area, and it might be possible to leverage it more broadly on a bigger scale. That's the only observation I would have about it.
Yeah, and I mean, with this project, that is the goal, to make this, you know, scalable. So, you know, it is the goal to connect with North Front Range MPO's Ride No Coast system and have a system that gets folks all the way from Fort Collins down to not very geographically inclined. I think Douglas County is far. So get someone from Fort Collins down to Douglas County. So Ride Alliance really just creates that network that allows these different transit providers to connect in. You know, a company like Uber and Lyft is not going to service every area in Colorado. You know, they don't reliably service really any rural area. So having multiple transit providers, allowing folks to keep using their current systems, but just creating this new way for them to connect into each other is really what Ride Alliance is trying to do, is just create this network.
But don't get me wrong, I'm not hung up on Uber and Lyft. I'm just saying it just seems to me like it's a much bigger, broader initiative, and it certainly could be done in the private sector just as easly.
Executive Director Rex, sorry.
No, yeah, go ahead.
No, thank you. I just wanted to add on to that question, to response. And Mallory knows this better than I mean, we do have contracts in place with Uber, not Lyft, right?
Yes, we just have one with Uber, but through our, the AAA uses a call center to help with trip scheduling. And so through that contract with the call center, clients can access also Uber and Lyft.
Yep, perfect. And it's the fastest growing segment of our transportation services that we provide, and it's the most cost efficient one too as well. So as part of how it relates and would be connected to this hub idea is that I think once it comes to the exchange, I think it's the folks that are ambulatory enough to be able to use Uber and Lyft of the world. Those would be then, you know, sent to Uber and Lyft versus the other ones. And I think the other thing what I really like about the hub concept is it doesn't necessarily have to be the same provider that brings the person to the destination and then brings them home. There's opportunity there for cost sharing, as Mallory suggested. I mean, some of the services that we provide, you know, there could be, you know, a couple people in a van, right? Whereas you might be able to trip chain with and get, you know, just better use of service. So yeah, we're very aware of, and quite frankly, it's the direction that we're going.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Yes. Director Guzman.
Thank you. Two comments on this conversation. The Federal Transit Administration 39 CFR 655. There's a new rule that they're exploring about the TNCs have thus far been exempted from needing to do drug and alcohol testing for people that are responsible for human life. And all of your other sectors that you had up there, all of the other groups that you had up there, they're required to do that type of testing for our operators because safety has to come first. So this is a big question and a big to-do. Will affect things like access on demand and utilizing services like Lyft or Uber or other TNCs going forward. That's one part. It's not determined yet. They're getting the feedback and they are going to make a determination, have an effect going forward. So that's one thing to consider when you're making. And the private sector is not always the best place for that work to be done because the safety guards aren't in place. The other thing that I'm thinking of is my train of thought on it. Sorry. I would say that the ease of doing this through a hub, instead of having to do that chain of calling, is actually really a brilliant idea. Helping my grandparents some of this work is challenging. Takes a lot of time, both for the individual who might have a time-relevant need to figure this out. We're blessed that we live in Denver. We have multiple options, but family members that might live further out would definitely encounter some more difficulty. So being able to partner and leverage all of the services that are available, provide an open and an accessibility that's really required and going to be something thoughtful about going into the future. What is it, 1 in 5, the trend for the age advanced adults in our region, politely said, right? My elders, but that's with a lot of respect and love. So something to consider. Thank you.
Appreciate both of those points. Thank you.
Deborah Johnson, and then Commissioner.
Thank you. Deborah Johnson, RTD. Just to add some color to Director Guzman's statement when he mentioned the element as it relates to drug and alcohol testing with the Federal Transit Administration. It's a proposed policy that was disseminated the latter part of December under the Biden-Harris administration relative to garnering input. Comments were due on the 13th. RTD did participate in that with the American Public Transportation Association that represents over 4,000 transit agencies. We put forward comments relative to having a work group assess maybe what would be advantageous. To Mallory's point earlier, when we talked about vehicles, we're talking about wheelchair accessible vehicles that are traditionally not available, with individuals that are working as independent entities providing services. And then there is a difference with the American with Disabilities Act of 1990 paratransit services that are required to be provided for a transit agency within 3/4 of a mile versus access on demand, which is RTD supplemental premium paratransit services that does not fall within the auspices of the American with Disabilities Act of 1990. I know that's a lot, but I wanted to ensure for people listening that there's a distinction between the different elements being provided for those with disabilities and those for seniors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director Adams.
I just want to clarify one thing, because I think some of the comments had too much of a transportation focus on it, but let me just speak as a person who's built systems and technology to really support things like we're talking about here. The reason I make the observation that sometimes the private sector is actually better equipped to do this is that sometimes you don't think about all the things that are involved when you're trying to build scalable platforms that really are intended initially to support thousands, and all of a sudden they got to support millions, and the cost associated with building that infrastructure, maintaining it, and keeping it going, you know, certainly is not to be ignored. And that's really the reason. So I focus more on that to say, if this is really a good initiative, then it ought to be built in a way so that its intent is to really support and is scalable, and technology changes so rapidly, and before you know it, you've got costs associated with doing something that you're not really planning for. So that's really the intent of the comment.
Skylar McKinley.
And I would just echo that. I would say an emerging area of our work at AAA is the understanding that the transportation network companies, which have formed the core of a lot of transportation systems, in some places replacing transit, certainly have moved the needle on impaired driving, are still not profitable. Uber and Lyft do not turn a profit. If the funders of these mechanisms, which have replaced public good transportation, decide to no longer fund them, they won't exist. So I would say it's great that we're having these conversations. The TNCs do a lot very efficiently. What they don't do is make money. And as Commissioner Adams alluded to, if they're not making money, they may not be permanent features of our transportation system, the same way that transit can be. And so that, I think, is why we like to have these broader conversations about what we, as the public, can do with the public good when we're not quite as motivated by the bottom line.
Thank you, Director Cook. Then Director Mulvey.
Hi, thanks. If we're talking broad approach, one thing I'd like to see is if that data, for example, about denials, if that could be correlated to locations, so that people who are downsizing and making decisions about where to move could make a decision to move to the better place for their future or their future transportation needs. So anyway, I don't know if that's possible, but it's food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Mulvey.
I want to express appreciation for Commissioner Adams' scalability point, in particular because RTD doesn't cover everybody, so we have to count for non-RTD areas. And Douglas County, for example, has a multimodal study that it's working on that it is looking at a broad range of options. So the API option plus scalability, I think, is an important focus. Thank you, Commissioner.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just to add a couple points to some of the comments that have been said. So again, with the Stage 1 planning grant, we are doing a ton of information gathering and data analysis right now to really make sure that we're being smart with how we do this. I recognize this is, our third grant with trying to bring Right Alliance up to, make it live, make it a reality. So we're being very, very thoughtful with how we're approaching this. We're considering, the options that we go with and how much is it going to cost? How much is it going to cost down the line with maintenance costs if a change needs to be made to keep that, API connection into the Trip Exchange Hub. So all of that is definitely being considered as we're, going through this process because we want to make this work. And then in terms of, like some of the other points made, one of the great benefits of the Trip Exchange Hub is it does create a central repository for data collection and reporting. So it would allow us to more easily see, where the trip denials are happening and other useful data points that help increase funding for these types of services.
Jacob?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Mallory said it pretty well. I think I'd just sort of add that, I've always used the analogy that we're building the Expedia of human service transportation, right? And when you think of a service like Expedia, you don't think so much about particular airlines, meaning providers. You don't think about geography. You actually don't even really think about the platform. You think about the fact that Expedia exists to help you find the best flight at the best price in that sense. And so I think that's what we're trying to do here at the end of the day is to build a platform and build an infrastructure and architecture that will allow us to do this coordination, to bring costs down, to provide more service to more people. And so the comments around scalability and the efficiency in doing so, we take to heart. And that's exactly where I think we're going with this project. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much, Mallory. We enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
In the interest of time, though, I think we're going to go ahead and move on. We're going to hit our administrative items, but first, I wanted to welcome Director Karen Banker, a new member representing RTD. Do you want to say anything? Or?
Thank you. Well, thank you for recognizing me. I'm looking forward to working with DRCOG. I've served on DRCOG back when I was on Longmont City Council, so I'm a little bit familiar with what you do, but I'm looking.
Great, thank you. Let me know if any of this is not correct, but I understand that we have other new alternate members on RTC, Chris Guchenreiter, Director Matt Larson, and Chris Nicholson, all are alternate members. So they've taken over the RTC, the seats that were previously held by Bob Broom, Joanne Rusha, Ian Hartwick, and Troy Whitmore. So we want to thank them for their service on RTC. We're going to go to administrative items. First is CDOT.
I'd like to offer up to Commissioner Cook, if you'd like to make some comments. Well, then I'll start by just saying, first of all, I've just returned from a couple of weeks in some very warm climate, only to return to Colorado, where the one thing I observe is that, look, we're having some exceptionally cold weather right now, and it's affecting all of us in a lot of different ways. So we just hope everyone's safe on the roads. In light of the weather condition, we're scheduled to have our CDOT commission meeting tomorrow and Thursday. And originally our meeting was to be an in-person meeting, but in light of the expected weather conditions, we've decided to hold our meeting tomorrow and Thursday as a virtual meeting. So those who might have otherwise planned on visiting or showing up may be made aware of that. We have a few things on our agenda that I thought I would just highlight for everyone, and the most important of which is Floyd Hill. So we're looking forward to an update on Floyd Hill as probably our most visible and significant project that we have going on. And Floyd Hill's was scheduled to be an $800 million project, but we expect to hear in a workshop tomorrow plans for the need to spend more money, maybe as much as $100 million more on Floyd Hill, and the complete update on why, and it affects a lot of different things. It affects bridges, tunnels, and other aspects of Floyd Hill, and the sources of funding to cover that added $100 million expenditure for Floyd Hill. So that's probably the biggest thing we have. Then we're also going to take another go through at our fiscal year 26 budget, and we're expected to approve a budget in March. So tomorrow and Thursday are our last opportunities as a commission to really take a look at that and make some conclusions about the budget. And as Karen Stewart mentioned earlier, we are having some challenges with our budget, as most of the other entities in the state are, and and Tabor is part of the culprit here. So we're going to try and figure out how we work around that. And then I was pleased to hear this morning about some of the comments on bridge and tunnel. And we're spending time on bridge and tunnel. So I was pleased to see some of the conversation this morning about bridge and your view for DRCOG on bridge and tunnels. Your assessments are pretty much the same as ours. We have a disproportionate number of bridges that don't rate, and we have to make the investment to bring them up to speed. And then the other thing we're planning on doing that I thought I would just mention that I'm pretty excited about is we're going to have an update on something we're calling our traffic incident management system, which is really something for the benefit of the state and something that probably doesn't get a lot of recognition. But I just read that last year alone, we were able to help 5,377 motorists on our roads who had problems being stuck or other issues. We have 56 vehicles on the roads in CDOT to do that, and we're spending about $7 million a year around the state. So it's something that's beneficial and helpful to all of us. And the last thing I'm going to mention is we were planning on having a recognition for some CDOT staff members who participated in helping the law enforcement in a high-speed pursuit on I-70. And we thought that it was such a positive experience all the way around, and that these CDOT employees literally put themselves in harm's way in order to reduce or minimize a high-speed chase. So we're planning on having a recognition for them tomorrow, or Thursday, I'm sorry, but now we are scheduled at another in-person meeting. But I thought it was such an interesting thing that they really saw their role as stepping in harm's way. So that was a good thing. Commissioner Cook, maybe you've got something to add.
Just one thing to add, to put a point on your excellent report. One reason the Floyd Hill cost has increased so much is that the price of steel has gone up 77% between 2020 and 2023. So you can see why that's affecting all of our projects, and it's another reason why the cost cuts are so difficult. Thank you.
You know, and just to echo your point, now if we throw tariffs on steel and aluminum, we can all imagine what that also might add to our cost as well.
Trestles, trestle, yeah.
That comes from.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll get a report from RTD. Deborah Johnson.
Yes, thank you. Deborah Johnson, once again, General Manager and CEO. I will start and then yield the floor to the directors that are present if they would like to supplement my report. First, I wanted to share that RTD is currently in the process of its tri-annual service change information gathering process for May of 2025. We have an online dashboard that lists out all the proposed service changes so people can see the adjustments that are being made, and we are accepting feedback through March 6th of, March 6th. Additionally, I wanted to share, over the last month, we have lifted multiple light rail speed restrictions. We had 29, we have lifted 20. We were supposed to undergo some work, but the weather hasn't been cooperating with us, so we've had to adjust. But what we've done to minimize impacts to the traveling public is to do work over the course of a couple of days, as opposed to doing it over the course of a small window, a maintenance window that leads us to do that over several nights. Additionally, along some other good news, we're working on a project to enhance real-time tracking of our light rail vehicles. RTD traditionally has utilized track sensors, and we are stepping into the 21st century using GPS as we go forward, so that will enable people to see actually where their vehicles are. And we've made a modification in our Next Ride app that shows basically the live tracking, and we term that so it's more indicative of what we're actually doing. So the GPS, that'll be underway, and I'll be providing updates as we move forward. A bit of good news for RTD, we were ranked as one of America's best mid-sized employers by Forbes. It was released last Wednesday. When we say mid-sized, that's an entity that basically employs 1,000 to 5,000 individuals. That data, as I said, was compiled by Forbes nationwide and utilized statistical data that was garnered through survey responses over a 3-year rolling period. And last but not least, last Tuesday, as a matter of fact, Senate Bill 25-161 was introduced, Transit Reform Bill. RTD's Board of Directors will be taking that under consideration at its executive committee meeting scheduled this Thursday at 11:15 a.m. So with that, I'll yield the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Guzman.
I'll be quick. I just want to thank Deborah for all of the hard work that she has done, and the agency staff for ensuring that we're dealing with our maintenance and repair work in a manner that is conducive to still moving people around quickly. We learned a lot of lessons last year trying to hit the floor running with the new expectations, and we are making great strides in doing that. We do have our regular board meeting on the 26th of February at 5:30 p.m. at 1660 Blake Street, Denver. Or you can look at the website rtd-denver.com and find out how to access it virtually from there. Both Director Banker and I are chair and vice chair. I'm chair, she's vice chair of the Finance and Planning Committee this year. So we have our work cut out for us as we look at the new fiscal reality from the federal government and through the FTA and what impacts that will have. So I'm sure while we're all doing that type of fiscal reality work, we will be busy with our nose to numbers at RTD and taking that on to try and figure out what the future looks like. That's it. Just get information to us about the service changes. Please, please, please go. There's a really cool layout. You can click on a tile if you know your regular bus route, if it's going to be changed in some way, and you can provide feedback by clicking on that, and it goes directly to service planning. The website's actually pretty user-friendly now, which is nice because it wasn't for years. So that 21st century comment's really true, but it's a good thing. Thank you.
Director Siroy? Anchor? Okay. Next up is our report from Regional Air Quality Council, and that's Director Silverstein.
Thank you, and I'll be quick. I know we're at time. Just to announce, I've been invited to brief the DRCOG board tomorrow evening about the work of the RAC. So if any of you are part of that meeting tomorrow night, you'll hear some what I hope is great information and detail about the work we're doing. A couple of things that I'll be highlighting and for you all to be aware of is funding for the Regional Air Quality Council. Like in any nonprofits, that's what we are. We're a nonprofit. We're not part of the state, but we're closely tied to the state with our funding and our work. And so we'll be talking about that, the status of things at RAC, and our dependence and and the interactions between, state and federal funding and the work we do. And also, making the pitch always, and some of you are here today, for our gratefulness for local government contributions to the RAC and our work. We're not, it's not a membership, it's a contribution. And we bother all local governments every year for funding, and thankfully, about a third of the local governments, mostly in the DRCOG region, contribute to RAC, which is excellent. So we're always in that mode of looking at our resources and figuring out what we can do with the money we have. So, but we're also working on continuing our efforts where we haven't stopped our work. We've just we're assessing based on our funding, the federal funding situation and how things might play out, the work we can do over this next year, and hopefully getting back to full speed come March. But we're kind of in a slow down mode right now to assess, to make sure we don't obligate ourselves in a way that all of a sudden we're on the hook, or we're leaving others on the hook for expenses that we had thought we could cover. So that's my update.
Thank you very much. Anything else for the good of the organization, the good of the group? I will remind you that our next meeting is March 18th, 2025. And Cam has if you parked in the garage downstairs, Cam has the get out of jail free cards. And thank you everyone for making the trip down here this morning. We're adjourned.